got to be honest about this, Richard, and other politicians do too. There is a cost to cutting migration in the long term, and it is higher. There absolutely is. This is basic economics that you're not getting right. And that cost is higher taxes for young people who are in their teens and 20s today.
Right, Richard?
Absolute twaddle.
It's not.
Reform's Richard Tice is here again having to argue against the same old platitudinous and economic arguments that the establishment uses to justify mass immigration. We keep hearing we have an ageing population argument all the time, and we hear it again here. If we need to import 1 million people a year just to function as a country, then something is seriously wrong. The pro-immigration lobby never mentions why it's almost impossible for many British people to have children. And that gets worse the more people we import. British people should not have to compete with the rest of the world for houses, education and healthcare in Britain. How can they have kids when they can't even get on the property ladder? The idea we need to import the third world to avoid economic collapse is a joke. It's a never-ending cycle that will result in the complete replacement of the British people, our way of life and culture. As Richard Tice says, immigration is going up and yet we are getting poorer. Immigration at current levels is an absolute disaster that no one wants and no one voted for. Take a listen to this. Well done once again, Reform and Richard Tice.
Yeah, evidently. I mean, I think there is consensus around people who are here illegally and working illegally. I've not really seen anyone kind of make the case for that. So it's not entirely surprising. Perhaps where there may be more disagreement, certainly between me and Richard Tice, is when you're talking about legal migration. Richard Tice said that that's out of control. I actually think politicians need to have a really honest conversation with the public, which is we've got an ageing society that presents immense long-term fiscal challenges. So, you need to pay, working people are going to have to pay more and more tax in order to support the same level of NHS services. There aren't easy efficiencies there. So you either put your own birth rate up, which no rich country has really succeeded in doing, or you have skilled immigration, which actually can boost economic growth and mean that people here have to pay less tax to support the same services. Now, it doesn't seem to me like any politician is willing to... There's a trade-off here. We've got to be honest about it. No politician is being honest about that.
Richard, you're not being honest about the trade-offs?
There's no trade-off at all. Look at the evidence. In the 1980s, when we had net immigration of about 30 to 50,000 every year, people were getting older, and guess what? We were training up our own British workers, our own healthcare and social care workers, and people were getting older, but everybody was being looked after. It worked well then. What you actually need to do is if you limit the supply of labour, one of two things happens. The price of the labour goes up, and yes, I'm very happy for the price of labour to go up. That's a great thing for workers on low pay. Or businesses invest in capital equipment to replace the labour that they can no longer afford. That's literally basic rule number one on economics. And this idea you can permanently increase the supply of the population. They all get older. Everybody gets older.
But the thing that's very different between now and the 1980s is that the birth rate has fallen. And that is something that politicians are not being honest about. If you have an ageing population, which means that your population structure is shifting to a greater proportion of retirement age, and you've got fewer working age people, that has shifted significantly since the 1980s, that does create a conundrum, which is young people in their teens and 20s today, in 30 years, you either have to say, we're not going to have the same level of health services, we're not going to have the same level of care for older people, which is personally not something I want to see, or you're putting a burden on those young people to pay more tax, which, you've got to be honest about this, Richard, and other politicians do too. There is a cost to cutting migration in the long term, and it is higher. There absolutely is. This is basic economics that you're not getting right. And that cost is higher taxes for young people who are in their teens and 20s today.
Right, Richard?
Absolute twaddle.
It's not. I mean, it's not twaddle, but
Life expectancy is no longer going up. It's flatline. The retirement age is going up. I'm
talking about the birth rate, Richard. There's links between the birth rate and a falling birth rate in the UK and other rich nations, ageing societies, and a big long-term fiscal crunch that's coming down the line. It's not just a reform problem. No politician seems to want to talk
Richard, do you want to come back on that?
if you have a stable population, then and you grow the economy, then everybody gets better off. At the moment, we've got a rapidly growing population and no growth, and everybody's getting poorer, and that cannot be sustainable.